I'm Evelyn Myers, 72 years old, living here in Savannah, Georgia. I've had a good life, wealth, comfort, the kind of life people dream of. I thought I had it all figured out, but no amount of money could prepare me for the day I lost my son. Brandon was my world. He was everything to me, the light of my life after Gerald passed away all those years ago. I can still picture him at 5 years old running around the backyard with that big, mischievous smile. Later at 25, he was my pride, an accomplished doctor, always working hard, always making me proud. We had our routine Sunday phone calls, long conversations, and even though I wasn't always in the same city, I knew he was there. And then, on that Tuesday in March, my world stopped. The phone call came as I sat in my kitchen sipping coffee. I didn't even need to answer it. Something inside me already knew. I was wrong to even hope. "Mrs. Myers," the voice said, kind but distant. "This is Officer Williams. I'm so sorry to inform you. Your son, Brandon, was in a car accident. He didn't make it." I dropped the phone. I didn't even realize I was crying at first, just sitting there staring at my hands, feeling the weight of something I couldn't explain. The silence in the house became deafening. I don't know if I can put it into words, but the emptiness that filled every corner of the house is something I'll never forget. I was alone, and not in the way that I had been before. This felt different. I looked around at all the things I had, all the money in the world. But suddenly, it meant nothing. I thought I understood loss. I really did. But nothing in my life could have prepared me for losing him. Not like this. I had millions in the bank, a house full of things, and an impressive portfolio of investments. But none of that could fill the hole in my chest. Money was just numbers, and those numbers meant nothing when I no longer had anyone to share them with. I spent the next few days just walking through the motions, the funeral arrangements, the visits from friends. All of it felt like I was floating outside of my body. Brandon's colleagues from the hospital came by to offer their condolences. They spoke about him in the most glowing terms, dedicated, compassionate, always giving more than what was asked of him. They talked about the long hours he worked, about how he cared so deeply for his patients. But I couldn't stop wondering, was he lonely? Did he ever feel the kind of emptiness I felt right now? We had our calls. But was that enough? And even as I tried to comfort myself with these thoughts, I couldn't help but feel that guilt creeping in, gnawing at me. Should I have been there more? Was I a bad mother for not doing more? The emptiness only grew as the funeral approached. I tried to focus on the service, on the beautiful words Father Martinez said about Brandon, about his service to others, his faith. But all I could think about was the silence in my house, the absence of his voice, the lack of his presence that had filled every room for all those years. I've been wealthy all my life. I thought that having money, a home, a comfortable life would make me immune to the kind of pain others talk about. But now, I see that no amount of wealth can fill the hole left by the loss of a child. And no matter how much I had in the bank, nothing could replace the feeling of emptiness that had taken over my life. I didn't know where to go from here. Everything felt hollow. I'd lost my son, my future. And now I was alone with nothing but my wealth, which in the end felt like a cruel reminder of what I no longer had. The day of Brandon's funeral passed in a blur. I barely remember the drive to the church, the faces that surrounded me, the prayers that filled the air. It was all a haze, a scene I could watch, but not truly be a part of. I stood there, a shell of myself, trying to process the words. Father Martinez spoke about my son's life, his dedication, his faith, his love for others, but nothing felt real. All I could feel was the heavy silence, a silence that grew louder with every moment. I couldn't connect to any of it, not to the faces around me, not to the sadness, not even to my own grief. I just wanted to go home to escape this feeling of being adrift in a sea of people who couldn't understand what it was like to lose him. As I stood by the grave, the wind tugging at my coat, my eyes wandered. The crowd was thinning, people starting to leave, offering their last words of sympathy. And then I saw them, 3 girls standing far off near a large oak tree. I had to squint to make sure I wasn't imagining it. They were identical dark hair, same serious brown eyes, the same black dresses too formal for children. They weren't playing or whispering like most kids their age would be. Instead, they stood together hand in hand, staring at Brandon's grave. There was something about the way they looked at it, something so solemn. They didn't seem like children at all. They looked so serious, too old for their years, and yet they were just standing there in a way that made my heart tighten. Curiosity crept in, and I found myself watching them more intently. They hadn't moved, still standing motionless by the tree. It wasn't just the oddity of them being there, it was their presence, the way they were so completely absorbed in that moment, that seemed to draw me in. I could feel my chest tighten, an uneasy feeling rising inside me. I started to wonder who they were, why they were there. Maybe they had lost someone too, though they seemed too young for that. Maybe they were visiting someone else's grave, but they didn't look like they belonged anywhere but here. Then without any warning, they moved. Slowly, as if on cue, they stepped forward, each carrying a single flower. Daisies. One by one, they placed them gently on Brandon's grave, kneeling with a reverence that made the whole scene feel surreal. I could hear their soft voices, barely above a whisper. And then one of them, the girl in the middle, said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Bye, Daddy." I froze. My mind struggled to make sense of what I had just heard. No, it couldn't be. My son never had children. He was never married. He never mentioned any family other than me. And yet, there they were, standing over his grave, calling him Daddy. I must have made a noise because all 3 girls turned to look at me. Their faces, once so focused and serious now, held a look of surprise followed by something that looked almost like fear. They didn't say another word. Without hesitation, they turned and ran toward the parking lot, their small hands still clasped together. I stood there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Had I imagined it? Had one of those children really called him Daddy? I couldn't make sense of it. It didn't add up. But the image of those girls, so quiet, so sincere, stayed with me, nagging at my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. What did it all mean? I glanced at Mrs. Chen, who had stayed by my side throughout the day. She looked at me, a gentle concern in her eyes. "Marlene, dear, we should get you home. You've had such a long day." She said, her voice soft, trying to guide me away from the confusion that clouded my thoughts. But I couldn't. I kept looking toward where the girls had disappeared, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. "Did you see those children?" I asked, my voice distant. "What children, honey?" Mrs. Chen asked, glancing around, her brow furrowing. I felt the confusion rising in my chest again. "The 3 little girls. They were right here a moment ago." Mrs. Chen looked around the now empty cemetery. "I don't see anyone, dear. It's just us now." Just us. It couldn't be. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't have. They had been there. They had called Brandon Daddy. But as I walked to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something that would change everything. I was left standing on the edge of the grave, staring at the spot where they had been with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of unease that I couldn't ignore. What had I just seen? And what did it mean? The days following the funeral felt like a blur. The house was still too still, and every moment was colored by the memory of Brandon. But my mind wouldn't let go of the image of those 3 girls. Their faces haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something important. I needed to know who they were. I couldn't rest until I understood the connection they had to my son. I spent hours sitting at my desk, searching through old photos, letters, anything that might offer a clue. I thought maybe I could piece together something about their lives, but I found nothing. It was as if Brandon had kept them hidden, tucked away in some corner of his life I hadn't known about. Then, in a folder marked with Brandon's old medical papers, I found a name, Margaret. There it was. Margaret, the woman who had been in his life for more than 10 years. The woman who had raised those girls. I felt my heart tighten as I processed the information. 10 years. How had I not known? Why had he kept her and those children from me? What kind of mother was I that I didn't even know about the other family my son had been supporting? My love for him twisted inside me, mixing with anger and confusion. How could he have kept such an important part of his life from me? I had always been there for him. Always. And yet there had been this entire world he hadn't shared with me. After a few days of wrestling with myself, I finally picked up the phone and called Margaret. The conversation was brief cold. She didn't even let me get a word in before she snapped. I told her I wanted to meet, to understand, to know about the girls. She refused, and her voice when she spoke was filled with so much hurt, so much anger. "You never accepted us," she said, her words cutting through the line. "Brandon kept us hidden because of you. He wanted to protect you to protect himself, but mostly he wanted to protect you from the truth. From knowing that he had another family, that I was the one who was there when he wasn't. When you didn't understand him, when you couldn't love him for who he was. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't understand it. My mind couldn't process her words, each one striking me like a slap. I thought I had known my son, but now it seemed that I didn't. Brandon had been hiding so much from me, living a life that I didn't know about with children. He had loved children I didn't even know existed. The weight of it all felt like it might crush me. My son, the man I had raised, had kept this secret, and in doing so, had chosen to protect me from something that he thought would break me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he wasn't just protecting me. He had been protecting himself too. Protecting himself from me. From the possibility that I would never accept the life he had built without me, that I would see his choices as a betrayal. Margaret's words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I felt broken, betrayed. I had loved my son with everything I had, and yet he had kept this part of himself away from me. And now I was left standing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. How could he have kept this from me? How could he have lived his life without sharing it with me? And more importantly, how could I ever accept that a part of him had been hidden from me for so long? I couldn't shake the feeling of loss that came from this revelation. It wasn't just Brandon I had lost that day. It was everything, every piece of him I hadn't known, every choice he made without me. And now, the girls, their faces, their voices, They were reminders of all the things I would never understand, of a life I would never be a part of. I sat alone in my living room, the weight of everything pressing on me. I had spent my entire life loving my son, and now I was left with the painful reality that my love for him had been one-sided. And with that knowledge came a new kind of loneliness, one that felt deeper than anything I had ever experienced. It was late one evening, the kind of quiet evening when nothing seems to matter but the weight of your own thoughts. I was sitting in the attic, a place I hadn't been in years, when I found it a small wooden box hidden beneath a stack of old books. The moment my hands touched it, I felt the rush of memories flood in. The box was sealed with a faded ribbon, its edges frayed from time. I hesitated, my breath caught in my chest, before finally opening it. Inside, I found a stack of letters yellowed with age, each one marked with my son's handwriting, Brandon's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in years. His letters, neatly folded, were tucked away, like secrets I never knew existed. I didn't want to open them at first, couldn't bring myself to. But my fingers trembled as I unfolded the first one. It was from years ago, one of the many years I had spent caught up in my own world, oblivious to the life Brandon had built behind the scenes. As I read the first letter, the words hit me like a slap. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've spent so much time trying to be what you wanted, what you expected. But there's another part of me, a part that's been kept hidden for so long. I've built a life, a family that I never shared with you because I feared you wouldn't accept them. I feared you wouldn't accept me." I put the letter down, feeling a lump form in my throat. I could feel the guilt rising in my chest. For all the years I had spent thinking I knew everything about Brandon, thinking he was mine and mine alone. How could I have missed this? How could he have kept something so important from me? I picked up the next letter, hoping the pain would ease, but it only deepened. In the following letters, Brandon confessed his fear. He spoke about Margaret, the woman I had never known existed, and their children. He apologized for keeping them hidden, for not telling me sooner. "I was so afraid of disappointing you, of you thinking I was wrong for loving them," he wrote. "But I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have let you in." The words blurred on the page as tears welled up in my eyes. Brandon had lived in two worlds, one for me and one for his family. How had I not seen it? Why had he carried this burden alone? And then, in the final letter, Brandon wrote something that cut through me like nothing else. "Mom, I hope one day you will meet them and that you'll see they're not the enemy. They're just like you and me, trying to love and live the best we can. I hope you'll forgive me for not sharing them with you sooner, but I had to protect you. I wanted to spare you the pain of feeling abandoned. I hope you'll find it in your heart to accept them someday." I sat there in the attic, surrounded by these letters from my son, feeling a new kind of ache. He had tried so hard to protect me, to shield me from the pain, but in doing so, he had kept me from knowing the people who were now so important to me. The weight of his love and guilt settled heavily on my chest. I wasn't sure if I could forgive him or myself, but for the first time since his death, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to open my heart again. I started watching them from a distance, unsure of where I belonged in their world. It was strange at first to see Chloe, Rose, and Sophie as children I'd never known, and yet they felt so familiar. I would find myself sitting in my car parked a little way from their school, just watching. Chloe, with her bright creative eyes, was always drawing or writing, her mind constantly at work. Rose, the quieter one, would often sit by herself, looking deep in thought, as if the world around her was too much to take in at once. And Sophie, the bold protector, always watching out for her sisters, guiding them with a fierce, loving confidence that reminded me so much of Brandon. It was as if I could see the echoes of him in each of them, in the way they held themselves, in the way they interacted with each other. I found myself drawn to them more and more quietly, observing, feeling a pull in my chest every time I saw them. I couldn't help but wonder what their lives had been like, how they had grown without me. I hadn't been there for their first day of school, or their birthdays, or the small moments that made up their childhood. And yet, somehow, Brandon had planned for all of that. He had made sure their future was secure. I'd found documents tucked away in the drawers, school plans, healthcare information, even college funds. He had thought of everything. Even in death, he had made sure they would be taken care of, provided for. As I watched them, I felt this deep longing, a yearning to be part of their world, to somehow undo the years I had missed. But with that longing came a deep sense of guilt too. I had spent so much time focused on my own grief that I hadn't noticed theirs. I hadn't been there when they needed a grandmother. How could I have been so blind? I had been so consumed by my own loss, I hadn't realized they had lost so much more. The more I watched, the more I wanted to step into their lives to somehow make up for the years I had missed. I knew it wasn't that simple, that it couldn't be fixed by just showing up one day and pretending everything was okay. But I couldn't help the way I felt. These girls, my granddaughters, were part of Brandon's legacy, and I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted them to know me, and I wanted to be the grandmother I should have been from the start. It was a quiet, tender wish, one I wasn't sure how to voice, but it was there, growing stronger each day. It had been weeks since I found the letters. They hadn't left my nightstand. I read them over and over, each time feeling both closer to Brandon and further from peace. As Christmas approached, I found myself standing in front of a blank card for far too long, unsure of what words could possibly be enough. In the end, I wrote what was honest, that I was sorry, that I missed them, that if they wanted, they could come by the house on Christmas Day. Just for a visit. No expectations. I placed the card in their mailbox and walked away before I could change my mind. The days crawled by. I baked cookies I wasn't sure anyone would eat, put up decorations no one would admire. Every corner of the house felt quieter than the last. I set 3 small gifts under the tree wrapped with care. Each one had a girl's name on it, written in cursive as if I'd known them all my life. The living room smelled of pine and cinnamon, but none of it could fill the space inside me. Margaret never responded. The silence said more than any words could. I told myself not to expect anything, that I had done all I could. On Christmas Eve, I lit a candle by the window, just as I used to when Brandon came home for the holidays. The hours slipped by. 8 turned to 9, 9 to 10. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch an old movie, pretending I wasn't listening for footsteps. The wind tapped against the windows, making the house feel even more still. I had just begun to gather the dishes when I heard it. A knock. Soft. Quick. Then another. I froze, heart racing every part of me, unsure whether to believe it was real. I opened the door slowly, expecting maybe a neighbor. But it wasn't a neighbor. Standing there, bundled in coats, cheeks red from the cold, were the 3 girls. Chloe held something in her hand, a piece of paper creased from being folded and unfolded. She held it out to me, and I took it with trembling fingers. The drawing showed a little brown house with a bright yellow door. 3 girls stood in front of it, smiling. Above it, written in big, uneven letters, were the words, "Grandma's house." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up and I dropped to my knees on the porch. The cold didn't matter. Nothing did. They didn't say anything either. Chloe stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my neck. Then Sophie. Then Rose. I felt them all around me, their warmth, their tiny hands holding on to me like they'd always belonged here. Tears spilled onto my cheeks, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were release, gratitude, forgiveness, all of it. I had never known this kind of love before, not like this, and for the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't alone. They had come. They had chosen to come. And somehow, despite everything, a piece of Brandon had found its way back home. We moved to the living room where the tree glowed soft and golden. The girls settled onto the rug, their coats unzipped, cheeks still pink from the cold. I brought them hot cocoa in mismatched mugs and offered them the cookies I'd made, which to my quiet relief they devoured. For a long moment, none of us said much. The warmth of the house filled in the silence. Then Chloe pointed to an ornament on the tree one Brandon had made when he was 7. It was lopsided and glittery, shaped like a star. That broke the quiet. I began telling them stories about the time Brandon tried to build a rocket in the backyard, about the Halloween he dressed as a pirate and lost his shoe trick-or-treating. Each story made their eyes light up in that curious, gentle way children have when they learn something new about someone they love. They asked questions, shy at first, then bolder. Sophie wanted to know if he had been brave. Rose asked if he liked reading. Chloe asked if he'd ever had a favorite tree to climb. I answered every question, slowly holding the memories like glass. After presents were unwrapped, and the living room looked like a soft mess of ribbons and paper, Sophie curled beside me on the couch and rested her head on my arm. She said it softly, not even looking at me. "Grandma Evie." My heart clenched. I didn't expect it. I didn't know what to say. I just reached for her hand and held it too full of emotion to speak. The others didn't say anything, but they came closer too, as if the name made something real. Before they left, I brought out an old photo album from Brandon's closet. It was something he never shared, not with anyone. Inside were pictures of him as a child, laughing in the sun, covered in mud, sitting on Santa's lap, reading in bed. They sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping each page slowly. Chloe touched one picture and smiled. "That's him," she whispered. "That's really him." For the first time, they saw the little boy he had once been. And for the first time, I felt like we were beginning to heal together. It took me weeks to gather the courage. After Christmas, I thought maybe things would be different, but Margaret still hadn't reached out. I understood that. I had intruded into her world after years of silence. Still, I needed to talk to her. Not for answers anymore, but for something else. Maybe to tell her I was sorry. Maybe to thank her. Maybe just to listen. When I finally called, she didn't answer. But a few days later, a message came. If I wanted to talk, I could come by after 6. That was all it said. I drove to her house just after sunset. The porch light was on the same warm yellow I remembered from the funeral. When she opened the door, Margaret looked tired, not just physically, but in the way grief lives inside a person. We sat at her kitchen table. It was clean quiet. The girls were in bed. At first, we didn't speak. We just sat. 2 women with too much between them, too much pain, too many misunderstandings. Margaret was the first to speak. Her voice was steady, but soft. She told me about the years after Brandon moved in with her. The nights he worked late. The mornings he played with the girls before heading to the hospital. How he used to fall asleep in the armchair with a baby on his chest. How he tried to balance everything to keep everyone safe. And then she looked at me with eyes that didn't accuse, but didn't soften either. She said she didn't hate me, but she had been afraid of me. Afraid that if Brandon let me in, I would try to erase her. Afraid I'd tell him his life, his love, his family weren't good enough. I didn't interrupt. I listened. I thought about all the years she'd spent alone carrying their world on her back, while I lived in mine, oblivious. I thought about what it must have been like for her watching me from the distance of Brandon's silence. Raising 3 children without the blessing of their grandmother. Wondering every day if she was doing enough. Her pain was different from mine, but it was still pain. It came from love and fear. The same fear I had once held, the fear of being left out, of being replaced. I told her I was sorry. I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't try to rewrite the past. I told her I had been blind, proud, and scared. That I had judged her before knowing her. That I had let my image of what Brandon's life should be keep me from seeing what it was, and what it could have been if I had only opened my heart. We sat in silence for a while after that. Margaret poured tea into chipped mugs. Neither of us reached for it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. She looked at me and said she didn't want the girls to grow up thinking family had to come with conditions. That if I was truly ready, she was willing to try. Not for her, not even for Brandon, but for the girls. I nodded. It was a small gesture, but it held everything. I told her I didn't know what kind of grandmother I'd be, but I wanted to try. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat 2 mothers who had loved the same man in different ways, finally ready to share the pieces of what he left behind. It was late in the evening when I opened the last letter. I had waited, holding it back like a final breath. I wasn't ready to let him go, not completely. But something inside me told me it was time. The envelope was smaller than the others, its edges soft from being touched too many times. His handwriting, once so familiar, looked almost fragile now. He started the letter with my name plain and gentle. Not Mom, not Mother, just Evelyn. Like he knew this one had to be different. He wrote that he knew I might be reading this without him, that he hoped I had found my way to the girls, that if I hadn't yet, he understood. He always understood even when I didn't. He said he never meant to shut me out, that he spent so much time trying to protect me from disappointment, from conflict, from himself, that in doing so, he created a distance he wished he'd never allowed. He wrote about love, that it wasn't meant to be tidy, that sometimes it looked like arguments in the kitchen and long silences, but other times it looked like bedtime stories and sticky hands and late-night tears. He said Margaret had given him the kind of love he never expected, and the girls the kind he never knew he needed. But he always hoped I would be part of that picture too. That maybe one day I would sit at the table beside them, laugh at their stories, see in them what he saw every day. He ended the letter with a line I will never forget. He said no one can live a perfect life, only a real one. And that he had tried every day to build something real, something worth leaving behind. He said he loved me, that he always did. When I folded the letter and held it to my chest, I didn't cry. Not this time. I just sat there, quiet, steady. I had missed so much, but I still had time. Chloe, Rose, and Sophie were in my life now. Margaret, too, in her own way. What we were building wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that moment, I felt him with me, not as the son I had lost, but as the bridge between everything I had been and everything I was becoming.